Robin Gibb, who died last night at age 62, left a legacy as a singer-songwriter.
He was the voice that could make the world cry. But in 2008, Robin Gibb's name was whispered for another reason. Not a song, not a concert, a child. A child born in silence while Robin was still married to the woman who had stood by his side for more than 2 decades. And when the truth surfaced, it didn't just test his marriage, it shook the Gibb family to its core. Because this wasn't just another rumor, this was Robin Gibb's secret love child, and it forced his family to face a scandal they would rarely, if ever, speak of. Before we dive in, make sure you're subscribed to RetroWaves, where the untold stories of music's greatest legends finally come to light. By 2008, Robin Gibb was no stranger to storms. He had lived through the disco backlash that nearly ended the Bee Gees. He had battled his twin brother Maurice in public and reconciled just before tragedy struck. And he had spent years navigating a marriage that was anything but ordinary. Robin and his wife, Dwina Murphy-Gibb, lived a life many couldn't understand. They spoke openly about their unconventional marriage, described by some as open, by others as simply complicated. But even in that context, nothing could prepare Dwina or the rest of the family for what would happen next. Because behind the walls of their Oxfordshire estate, Robin had begun a relationship that would change everything. And in 2008, the secret they had kept hidden came into the light. Her name was Claire Yang. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't in the music industry. She was the housekeeper in Robin's home, a quiet presence, trusted to keep the daily rhythms of the Gibb household running smoothly. But as Robin's marriage stretched into its 3rd decade, whispers began to form. Robin and Claire were spending more time together, and slowly, that professional line blurred into something more personal. Some say Dwina knew about it. Others say she was blindsided. But one fact would soon become undeniable. Claire Yang was pregnant. In November 2008, news broke that Robin Gibb had fathered a daughter with Claire, her name Snow Evelyn Robin Juliet Gibb. It was the kind of revelation that could have ended a marriage. A rock star having a child outside wedlock was nothing new, but Robin wasn't just any rock star. He was a Bee Gee, and he was still very much married. The British press pounced, splashing headlines about the Bee Gees' secret daughter. Fans were stunned. The story seemed almost unbelievable, but Robin didn't deny it. This was his child. How did his wife Dwina react? Publicly, she was composed, calm, almost detached. She told reporters that she and Robin had always lived by their own rules, that their marriage had different boundaries than most. But behind closed doors, friends later hinted that Dwina was deeply wounded. The woman who had stood by Robin through scandals, health scares, and career highs now had to face the most personal betrayal of all, her husband fathering a child with another woman inside their own household. It was humiliation not just for her, but for the entire family. And yet she stayed. Why? Some believe it was loyalty, others pragmatism, but to Dwina, marriage meant endurance, even when it hurt. The revelation didn't just affect Robin and Dwina, it rippled outward to the rest of the Gibb family. Robin's children from his first marriage, Spencer and Melissa, suddenly had a half-sister, and the extended Gibb clan, already shaken by Maurice's death in 2003 and the family's grief, now faced a new fracture. But unlike the public feuds of the past, the Gibbs did not speak about this scandal. No interviews, no confessions. It was a quiet wound, a shadow that followed them, but one they chose not to illuminate. For Claire Yang, the aftermath was just as complex. She had given birth to Robin's daughter, but she wasn't welcomed into the family fold. Instead, she became a figure on the outside. Robin reportedly provided financial support. A trust fund was said to be created for Snow. But Claire herself vanished from the spotlight, living quietly, rarely photographed, rarely quoted. It was as if the family wanted the story buried, but the truth was already out. For Robin, the scandal was a test of his carefully crafted image. For decades, he had been the intense, soulful Bee Gee, the twin with the haunting voice, the songwriter with the gift for melancholy. Now tabloids were painting him as the aging rock star who couldn't keep his vows. But Robin, ever the survivor, refused to let the scandal define him. He didn't deny it. He didn't apologize for it. He simply carried on, writing, recording, and performing, even as whispers followed him. But one question lingered in every fan's mind. If Robin and Dwina had always described their marriage as open, then why did this revelation still sting so deeply? The truth was that even in an unconventional marriage, boundaries exist. And for Dwina, a child born out of that arrangement crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. By the end of 2008, the story had faded from headlines. The world moved on. But inside the Gibb family, the silence remained. A child had been born, a wife had been wounded, and a family had been forever changed. But this was only the beginning, because as Robin's health began to falter, the presence of his secret daughter raised even more painful questions. Who would inherit his legacy? And how would this child, born of scandal, fit into the story of one of music's greatest dynasties? As the 2010s began, Robin Gibb's health started to falter. The man whose falsetto once soared over stadiums
when the ocean let us be, we belong.
Was now battling crippling pain, hospital stays, and finally, a cancer diagnosis. For many, these years should have been about legacy, about celebrating the decades of music that made him immortal. But for Robin, there was another question he couldn't escape. What would happen to the daughter he had fathered in secrecy? To the outside world, his wife Dwina remained a constant presence. She was there at his side in hospitals, quietly managing his care. She attended press conferences, updating fans on his condition, asking for prayers. But behind those calm appearances lay a woman still grappling with betrayal. Friends later revealed that Dwina, though loyal, never truly healed from Robin's affair with Claire Yang, and yet she stayed. When Robin became frail, when the man who once danced across the stage could barely stand, it was Dwina who carried him through. The humiliation of 2008 had not broken her resolve, it had only deepened her silence. But inside the family, the tension never fully disappeared. Snow, Robin's young daughter, was growing up in the shadow of a fractured truth. She was acknowledged but rarely spoken of, supported but kept at a distance. It was as if the Gibbs lived in two worlds, the public world of music, fame, and legacy, and the private world where one child's existence raised questions nobody wanted to answer aloud. Those close to Robin in his final years said he often looked back with regret, not just about fame or music left unwritten, but about the chaos his personal life had created. Robin had always been a man of contradictions, passionate, restless, and deeply emotional. He could write a song like "I Started a Joke" that touched millions, but struggled to navigate the emotional landmines of his own marriage. And as illness tightened its grip, those contradictions weighed heavier than ever. Then came the most difficult question of all. What about Robin's fortune? What about his estate? By the time of his death in 2012, Robin's wealth was estimated in the tens of millions. His will, drawn up before his illness, became the subject of speculation. Would his secret daughter, Snow, inherit anything? Would Claire Yang, the housekeeper turned mother of his child, be provided for? Reports suggested Robin had indeed set aside a trust fund for Snow, ensuring she would be financially secure, but the silence around it fueled endless rumors, because when a music dynasty like the Bee Gees is involved, inheritance isn't just about money, it's about legacy, and legacy is something the Gibbs guarded fiercely. When Robin died in May 2012, fans around the world mourned the loss of a voice that had defined generations. Thousands gathered, tributes poured in, and the Bee Gees' songs once again filled the airwaves. But behind the public grief was a family carrying private pain. Dwina had lost her husband. Spencer and Melissa had lost their father, and Snow, just a child, had lost the parent whose name she carried in secret. The tragedy was layered, because while the world celebrated Robin's music, the family was left to navigate the silent fractures he had left behind. For Snow herself, life would never be ordinary. She was born into one of the most famous musical families in history, yet she was also born into silence. Her existence acknowledged, but rarely discussed. In the years since Robin's death, Snow has been kept far from the spotlight. No interviews, no public appearances, protected by her mother Claire Yang from the relentless curiosity of fans and tabloids alike. And maybe that's the way Robin would have wanted it. Because while the scandal broke him in private, Snow was still his daughter, and she carried the most precious part of him, his name. For the Gibb family, Robin's scandal felt eerily similar to the tragedies they had endured before. Maurice, Robin's twin, had also wrestled with alcohol, public scrutiny, and the difficulty of balancing fame with family. Now, in Robin's final years, history seemed to echo itself. The Gibbs were once again dealing with grief, once again dealing with scandal, and once again closing ranks to keep the world from seeing too much. But here's the thing about Robin Gibb. No matter how messy his personal life became, the public didn't stop loving him. When fans remember him, they don't remember the tabloid stories of 2008. They remember Massachusetts.
Going back to Massachusetts.
They remember To Love Somebody.
Love what's that? To love somebody.
They remember the haunting beauty of I Started a Joke. And in some ways, that's what made the scandal so jarring, because Robin had always been the BG who wore his heart on his sleeve, sensitive, intense, almost fragile. The idea that he could have kept such a seismic secret felt almost impossible, and yet he had. But even after Robin's death, the story didn't fade away, because the existence of his secret daughter left behind questions that could never fully be answered. Would Snow grow up to claim her place in the Gibb family legacy, or would she remain the shadow child? The one the Bee Gees never spoke of, but who carried their blood all the same. The answers would define the family's future and reveal the true cost of Robin Gibb's final scandal. When Robin Gibb was laid to rest in June 2012, the funeral was a moment of unity for a grieving family. Barry, the last surviving brother, delivered a eulogy through tears. Dwina stood tall, dignified, even in her sorrow. Robin's children, Spencer and Melissa, mourned in quiet strength, but there was another presence there, spoken of only in whispers. Snow, though just a child, she was part of this story now. Her existence couldn't be erased. Her presence was undeniable. She was living proof of Robin's choices that had brought both joy and fracture. In the years that followed, Dwina became the steward of Robin's memory. She granted interviews about his music, about their life together, about his enduring genius. But on the subject of Snow, she remained silent. For her, Robin's love child was a scar she carried quietly. Friends described her as forgiving, but not forgetting. She had stood by Robin until the end, but the betrayal had carved something into her soul that could never be removed. It was the kind of pain that doesn't shout, it lingers, and it shapes everything that comes after. After Robin's death, the tabloids once again circled. Stories emerged about money, wills, and who would inherit his millions. Some claimed Snow had been left a trust fund. Others speculated she had been excluded. The truth was never made entirely clear, and perhaps that was intentional, because for the Gibb family, legacy wasn't just about finances. It was about protecting an image. And Robin's scandal, though undeniable, was something they hoped would fade into silence rather than define his story. As the years passed, the world waited to hear from Robin's secret daughter. Would she step forward? Would she speak? Would she claim her father's name in public? But Snow did none of those things. Protected by her mother, Claire Yang, she remained invisible. No interviews, no documentaries, just silence. And in that silence, she became a kind of myth, a reminder of the story that the Gibb family rarely acknowledged, yet could never erase. For Barry Gibb, Robin's older brother and the last surviving BG, the scandal was one more weight to carry. Barry had already endured the deaths of Andy in 1988 and Maurice in 2003. Now he was left to shoulder not just the Bee Gees' musical legacy, but the complicated, tangled stories of their private lives. Barry never spoke about Snow. He never criticized Robin. But those close to him said the grief of losing his brothers was compounded by the knowledge that their family story had been left unfinished, full of wounds, secrets, and unspoken truths. And perhaps that is the truest way to understand Robin Gibb. He was a man of contradictions, the sensitive twin who could sing like an angel, but who lived with demons he couldn't quiet, the devoted husband who stayed married until the end, but who fathered a child with another woman, the artist who poured honesty into his songs, but who left behind secrets his family refused to name. It was this contradiction that made him so compelling, and it was this contradiction that made his final scandal impossible to forget. Today, more than a decade after Robin's passing, the world remembers him for the music. The Bee Gees' harmonies remain immortal. Their songs still echo through weddings, films, radio, and generations of fans who weren't even alive when disco ruled the world. But behind the curtain of fame lies the quiet legacy of Robin's choices. A child who grew up far from the spotlight, a wife who endured in silence, and a family who learned that even legends carry secrets that never fully disappear. Robin Gibb's story wasn't just about music. It wasn't just about fame or tragedy or even survival. It was about the cost of secrecy, the cost of silence, and the cost of a decision that forever changed the lives of those closest to him. Because while the world sang along to How Deep Is Your Love, Robin was wrestling with a love he could never publicly explain. And while fans cried to I Started a Joke, Robin himself was carrying the quiet ache of a family divided. In the end, his secret daughter was both his greatest scandal and his most fragile legacy. What does this story teach us? That behind every legend, there is a human being. That fame doesn't shield anyone from mistakes or from their consequences. That even in an open marriage, even in a life lived outside convention, betrayal can cut deeper than words. And perhaps most of all, that silence is sometimes the loudest legacy of all. Snow Evelyn Robin Juliet Gibb may never stand in front of cameras, may never sing her father's songs, may never claim her place in the Gibb dynasty, but her existence is written into the family's story forever, a story that began with music and ended with a secret. If you found this story powerful, subscribe to RetroWaves, because behind every song, behind every stage light, behind every legend, there's a story the world was never meant to hear, and we'll be here to tell it.